for your introduction. Thank you, everybody, for your time today, spending just extra energy on a Saturday. I know that this is a lot of ask for your personal time, so I thank you so very much for the extra investment in yourself today to help figure out for a better future you. Today, I hope to impart some presentation strategies for success in the job search. To introduce myself, I am Missy Yarbrough. I've been designing for quite a while, since 2003, thanks to Neopets, but I have been in the professional space for at least 10 years, but currently I am a career coach at Careercoach.design, and here you can see are some of the companies, both large and small, that I've also designed and done work for. But I've also done other work outside of design because I just love interacting with people and listening to their stories and just really figuring out how to help them move forward, both organizations and individuals. So I have here a really quick countdown. I don't know why it started at 2, but essentially this countdown is a representation of the average amount of time a hiring manager, a recruiter, a future team member will spend reviewing your resume or portfolio. Initially, I know that's not comforting. I know, a little bit of a shocker for some of y'all that might be starting out in this journey, but I also recommend that we may reconsider our position on it. What can we do to optimize for that initial 5-second impression? Well, I like to think of it as a lot more of a mentality exercise, in that we have the power to decide how that 5 seconds go, a lot more than we give it initial thought. Sometimes there's those intrusive thoughts that get in our way, and other times there's just a lot of noise within our own internal systems that gets in the way of our own mission and goal achieving. So I like to think of it, it's really thinking about the situation a lot differently. I don't know where you're coming from today, because everyone's here from different paths, different journeys. Some of you may come from more formal backgrounds. Some of y'all may be a little bit more self-directed, self-exploratory, like I originated. And for others, you might be pivoting from a different career span. Either way, I can tell you from past experiences and helping other people that there is a way for everybody to figure out how to pivot themselves into the space of design. Simply because if you have the desire to help out people by solving their problems, that little small desire expands and scales out quite well. The exercise here really is introducing yourself at a base level as a stranger to another stranger. You might know that today we have a lot of stranger danger on the interwebs, anything from Social Security to scams to phishing. There's all sorts of things that we have to watch out for as personal human beings. And whether or not we talk about that in job search is the same or not, I think that that's changing as AI is being introduced. There's a lot more shifts in how socialized we are around job searching and placement. I remember about 10, 15 years ago when I started job searching, there was still some sentiment around going to physical places and introducing yourself as a stranger to the potential hiring groups. A lot of the go-to recommendations is to go online to direct career pages and find yourself any possible job listings. So I won't say that that's like the end all be all, because at the end of the day, there's billions of people on this world. And I know that's a really big number, but at the end of the day, this is about the search of that one future of optimizing your story to connect with that future self, that future employer that wants to bring you onto their team. So the true exercise here is introducing yourself as a credible designer to your future colleagues. You have no idea who your future colleagues might be, but you know who you are at the very bare minimum. And maybe you don't quite have that figured out. And in today's discussion, I will also be sharing a little bit of my personal journey over the years as it pertains to presentation expectations and delivery. But for your future colleagues, you can at least start illustrating the profile of you so that way your future colleagues can start formulating that idea, the magic vision of what it's like to work alongside with you. For many of y'all, I don't know if maybe you have been to Disneyland or Disney World or any of the Disney properties, but the brand Disney contains that level of magic and happiness that people worldwide love to gravitate to. And we want to create that same sense of magic for ourselves as a potential candidate to be hired. So let's start with establishing that credibility. 5 basic questions of who, what, when, where, and why. Starting off with the who, I love borrowing a reference from Taken of I don't know who you are and I don't know what you want. That's such a big thing here on online spaces where we are often balancing out our needs for privacy and data while also trying to figure out how do we get better results that optimize towards our needs. There's a little bit of give and take. So in order to help everyone understand what they can extract from their personal profiles, I at the very least will make these high level recommendations to you to include your name and your current title if you have one. If you're a student and you're trying to break into the industry, I definitely will say a title that you're aspiring to: associate visual designer, associate illustrator, a graphic designer, something that puts a little bit of definition as to what you're targeting and striving for. Also, your contact information. This is just so people of other places, other viewingship can reach out to you and make a decision. Hey, I want to speak to you. How can I do that? Email, your city and zip. That also helps recruiters and hiring managers get an understanding of where you're based at, and then creating a LinkedIn profile. These are all very accessible information that helps give in a little bit more profile to you. This last bit here with phone number, you can include it, and you'll see in my resumes that I do have it, but that is probably legacy information. For those of y'all that are engaging forward, I recommend having a Google phone number to filter out fraudulent spam calls and text messages, because unless you want to be like me, I get random calls from Chinese delivery warehouses, then yeah, this will just help out your sanity in terms of potential recruiters and potential hiring managers that are reaching out to find out more about you. Now, we can get to the next part of the what of your credibility. The what profile of you is really about cutting through the edges of danger as being a stranger and pivoting that mental understanding of you by providing social evidence and proof that you are capable of doing the job that they're asking you to do. So some of these examples include providing social proof of organizations and companies that you've worked with, skills that you can bring to the table, specializations that you might have. For all I know, you might be a big train building nerd. That's fantastic, because there are plenty of people involved in the train design process and plenty more that need specialization within those spaces. I guarantee you not everyone will have those specific nuances. Then we'll go into the when of your profile. This is just really giving a little bit of context as to how many years of experience you've been in an industry or have dedicated to your craft. But probably more importantly, for hiring perspective, is your availability. This is something that from a profile perspective, I don't often know looking at resumes and portfolio if somebody is available for immediate hire or might be open to a conversation. So being a little bit more transparent about that up front really helps offset the required time to dig for that information in that 5-second impression. Next, we'll cover where. Where are you? I mean, there's like at least 75 people in this fantastic session and presentation, and thank you so much. But unfortunately, I will not be able to track down everybody's current location. So imagine if I were a hiring manager or recruiter looking through hundreds of resumes, hundreds of portfolios, and being like, man, I really hope that they are where I need them to be a viable candidate for the area I'm trying to uh, figure out a placement for. Because of taxations, because of local laws and how business structures are set up, every business will have variation as to what they're able to hire for. So you might be seeing that in current times, we have a lot of positions that are hiring for remote capabilities, but it turns out you have to actually physically live in specific states. Um, by including that information on what you're open to, it really just helps any potential eyes that engage with your assets that you're open to possible remote opportunities, hybrid, or in person. And for whatever reason, if you have like a combination of all of these, you can include open to all location preferences or cities. And then lastly, but probably the most importantly, why? Why is it that you do the work that you do? Why is it that you're here on this beautiful Saturday, wherever you're at? Why is it that you're putting all this work and wanting to find a future with your employer? At the end of the day, it's about establishing your purpose. Purpose in your work, what drives your interests in design. And ultimately, this is your opportunity to express your humanity. For some folks, it's going to be a little bit more um, soft skill oriented in the sense of like, I believe in the positive benefit of food and how it helps influence culture, influences bonding and family times. Therefore, I'm looking for a new opportunity around food management services, something like that. Otherwise, this can be preferences for your future self of just expressing those particular industries that you might be vested in. To borrow from my last layoff, I had three different particular industries that I targeted and called out in my About Me profile, and that was seeking opportunities to better enable people's mental health, to bind people through community and gaming, and then lastly, the last opportunity that I specified was just really researching challenging problem spaces. So that leads a little bit of openness to project opportunities for somebody that might want to engage with me. But there's a big note here, and maybe this is something that within our presentation preparation, we don't necessarily factor in. And that is your portfolio and your resume, your interview approach will change. It's always going to change, primarily because you will also change. Um, I mean, as far as a designer, we're always looking towards the future and trying to see better ways of providing better outcomes and solutions to others. So it's natural that the assets that we're preparing will need revision as we're progressing through life. Um, but this, I want to transition into the spaces of what does establishing credibility look like as a resume? I have a GIF here off to the right, just describing, man, my resume could fit onto a post-it note. And maybe, yes, it doesn't feel like you have a lot to work with, but depending on how you decide to take away from today's conversation, you might rephrase that differently and take in a lot more of your personal experiences, involvements, and other activities and social engagements as part of your resume inclusions. So let's start out with optimizing for ATS. Uh, this part, I would like to include reference for ATS primarily because this is the computer side. This is the side that helps our recruiters and hiring managers understand a lot of information very quickly, but in doing so, there is a level of dependency from the system side. The ATS stands for an applicant tracking system. And if you walk with me for a second here, visualize yourself as a hiring manager and taking 500 different applications for one spot, a designer. How can that recruiter or hiring manager get through that pile of information quickly and effectively? Well, ATS is often used to call out those keyword searches, as you might see here, some things are laid out a little bit differently on this particular resume than I might have for others, but ultimately it's to help highlight those keywords for relevancy. And then from relevancy, they can start honing in onto candidates that have those specific criteria that they're looking for. So the perk is it helps them get through the volume, but the downside is it might miss out on your particular resume if you don't have those keywords. Additionally, ATS is very, very picky in how it reads content. It tends to read content line from left all the way to the right. So if you are working with 2 or 3 column information formats, you might get something to the effect of Missy Yarbrough, Austin, Texas, hello at Missy Yarbrough, blah, blah, blah. Instead of Missy Yarbrough, and then actually, now that I said that, this actually works for this one. I'll show it in a different resume later, but hold on to that thought. You also want to be mindful about optimizing your resume for the quick scan. Create visual groupings. And this way, if you get through the ATS system, then you have to get through the human system. Once again, that 5-second rule and generalization that someone will only spend that much time looking at your assets. And in this case, I've highlighted here in green some of the items that feel most predominant. A quick way to ascertain whether or not your resume is effective for glancing is to do a squint test. And this is a lesson that I've borrowed from my days in drawing class, where you would look at your still life and then do a squint test to see what are the most contrasting values, what stands out to you the most versus everything else. And when you do a squint test, it's pretty clear that some things will stand out. In this case, all the bold elements and all the header elements I have here. If you don't have a lot of experiences and you're having trouble filling out your post-it note of resume, you can use a list containing those descriptive responsibilities that you did instead of doing a paragraph with those short lines. Additionally, this is a little bit of a back and forth as you evolve through your career of whether or not you emphasize your roles in companies first. But overall, I would definitely say an improvement I would make on this resume, which was from 11 years ago, is to emphasize your roles in companies over section labels. Because recruiters and hiring managers are looking at resumes all day, every day, they don't really need to know the labels. They can figure out very quickly what the sections are. Just help them out with trying to figure out what is most relevant to their interests. Okay, moving on to the next page that I have for resumes is optimizing it to tell your story. This is kind of difficult in the space of figuring out what resonates with people because everyone is different. For example, I have here a tell me about yourself paragraph where sometimes some people will tell you that's not necessary. Others will say, no, it's nice to have because it gets me a little bit of a quick profile, who you are very quickly without diving into this specific section. Either way, I recommend telling your story in a way that's most relevant and direct experience if possible. And if you don't have direct experience, then your education, tools, and skill sets, and any possible activities that incorporate the skill sets that you would be applying in your future job. I have some tips for asserting relevance to the target position. And this here, you can see that my resume, this one is definitely tailored for senior product design role, whereas the previous design resume that I had is a little bit more general. I don't even have anything incorporated title here. But if you look here, then I have some semblance of design, webmaster, operations. It's not as tightly pulled together. And then if you looked at my first one here, there's a lot of random looking information here between a software designer, brand ambassador, greeter, production assistant runner, and for the context of a product designer, this is not a very good resume. However, I was using this information to apply towards a brand ambassadorship opportunity. And the context of that is that they needed somebody that was customer facing, willing to engage with people. They're okay with it being a gig work interaction. So therefore, I extracted more information about my past history with worthy events. This includes my free time involvement as an IBM Toastmasters Club VP, as well as an anime club president, and other possible relevant skills. Use active action verbs. This is one that I think is very important because as we are making updates to our resumes over time, sometimes our action verbs become a little drier. We don't give it as much thought, especially with ChatGPT. I understand it's really easy to curate your story through that, but I recommend like injecting those action verbs to highlight a little bit more engagement from your side that you're taking initiative, especially within spaces that call for leadership. Highlight achievements and metrics. You can see here that I have a call out to one-on-one mentorship totaling 350 sessions, over 15,000 minutes. And I'm looking at this now, my future self now, and I realize that I could also have the benefit opportunity to include the number of people that I've helped with career placement. And at this point, I think it's over 100 in my free time. I'm also seeing a few comments here as far as fancy fonts and colors. The great question as well. So I've gotten a little mixed feedback around that. Personally, I think color still works fine, at least if you use one accent color, and then the fonts, as long as your fonts are contained within backup fonts, I think it's also acceptable. For context, I usually make all my resumes in Google Docs because if Google Docs isn't reading it and I can't copy paste it from Google Docs into another one, then I likely am going to have issues copy pasting it into another software system. The last bit here that I have is to check your grammar. This might be something that with storytelling for your resume, it comes off as a little confusing if you're not cognizant of your past and present tenses. And when you're checking your grammar and checking whether or not that it's currently active versus your past, this is just a really good way to keep that story more consistent. If you have a lot of work experiences, trim it down to the ones that's most relevant to the role that you're looking for. Okay, so what does establishing credibility look like as a portfolio? I'll start out with overall portfolio tips, and this one is to start off with your homepage. Again, we have that 5-second impression rule to guide us, and I like to remind people, what does your above the fold experience look like? For some people, I've seen a lot of portfolios where it is a stock imagery photo, a name, and then navigation, but there's not much content or substance for me to gravitate off of. So then I wind up scrolling down and I'm like, oh, how much time does it take for me to get to the information I need to know and understand as a potential hiring manager or recruiter? So keep in mind that the above the fold essentially has all the basic information about you as a profile to make that confident decision to continue reading. Again, with navigation, we want to expand the ability for a viewer to interact with your profile. So as you see here with Lee Floyd, he has a tab for latest information about himself. And I know that this is not most accessible, but he also has a tab for his work, about, services, review, and contact. I want to call this out specifically because Lee is a freelance designer as well as a career coach. So he has a couple of extra tabs that addresses potential clients that may be interested in him and the role and capacity of services that he offers, as well as trusting their time with him through reviews. For most portfolios and job seeking opportunities, your work and about and contact usually serves pretty well. I will also incorporate some tips for self-promoting yourself with a statement. And in this case, I have a couple of examples. But the idea of a self-promo statement is that it should serve as a tell me about yourself elevator pitch without the requirement of you being there. In this particular example, we have 7 years of experience. I have a proven track record of delivering products across various industries. I specialize in designing AI-driven and data-focused products that utilize machine learning to forge intuitive, seamless user experiences. Now, with my lizard brain of assumptions, I can make a gander that perhaps Alice might be interested in other complex challenges and projects, especially if it includes AI, machine learning. Maybe she might be open to cryptocurrency. Either way, she's not one to shy away from big, daunting challenges. Plus, she already has her title up here and a handy access to her resume. Another example that I have here that I remember helping Janie when she was in our Pathrise program, I was just exposing her interests of how she solves problems. And in this case, she loves presenting beautiful, simple solutions. But she also highlights these three core um, specifications of interests and accessible AI, inclusivity, and technology for good. And while they're specific, they're not too specific that it bounds her boxes of possibilities from a hiring manager's perspective. A hiring manager can look at this and be like, oh, it seems like Janie has a lot of involvement looking into more technology engagement for the human experience. What can we do from our current project of maybe a social development product? This one here is use an inviting, approachable voice in writing your content. I know that this can have various mileage in terms of what does inviting and approachable mean. In general, I like to think of this as an exercise of if you were to present this to somebody, would their feedback be like, ooh, they sound a little bit interesting to talk to? Or does it fall a little flat? And the reason why I bring this up is because sometimes we write our promotional statements, we can get a little invested into the buzzwords. And buzzwords, while they sound great, lack substance to ground them. So whatever you do in your writing and tailoring your content, double check that it's reflective of you and your authenticity and your voice, and that if someone were to interact with your content, that it feels pretty familiar to who you are as a person. So, for example, because I'm from Mississippi, the culture there is a little bit more black and white in the sense of there's not a lot of opportunities for expressive variations. And so I grew up engaging with people and telling people, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, and assuming pronouns and whatnot. And now that I've kind of expanded outside of that space and consideration, I've had to adjust my tone and delivery to people. When I showed up at IBM, I very much had a very deep Southern accent, and it was very jarring. And and it was to the point of like, hello, everybody. My name is Missy Yarbrough. It's really good to meet y'all, and I look forward to understanding your engineering constraints and restrictions so that way I can provide better design solutions. It's a little bit distracting. So I've had to really tone that down and make it a little bit more cleaned up so that way I can best focus on delivering a clear, concise message to people. And lastly, with optimizing your homepage, use clear call to actions to allow others to contact you or to download your resume. This is something that I think with websites, we get really focused in on our content and we might be like, man, let's put everything. Sometimes simple is best. Give people what they need, And that is if they're interested, give them a means to reach out to you. Next, on your homepage, there's a likelihood you will have project cards. I don't have included here, but the number of project cards does vary from design discipline to discipline. But in general, I definitely recommend 3 to 5. But of course, it's a curated selection. So the best of your work. And what that often means is selecting from your background the complexity of problems that you might have faced, things that didn't necessarily go right, but that had a fulfilling or interesting outcome, and or if you are more visual based, something that had a little bit more iteration and exploration involved. Those projects stand out to recruiters and hiring managers of, oh, there's some parallelism from this person's work history into what I'm currently doing with my project. This is great. I would love to see how they continue to apply that information more forward. So as you can see here, I have an example from Stephanie G's portfolio where she has a little bit more visual engagement with her project cards, um, clear labels, titles, years even, and she includes as a bonus how long it will take to read through the case study. So that's a little bit of nice UX injection in there. Uh, in this case, we also have descriptions here. This is usually your opportunity to define your impact for how that project was fulfilled. So, for example, you might have a project where you were faced with a problem where you had to do a redesign. And as a result of the redesign, you now had an improved experience of people visiting the site and staying on the site by 60%. And that itself like strikes hiring managers' interest because once again, your portfolio is indicative that you want to help figure people's problems out using your design process. This last bit here that I have with project images, in general, keep them interesting but visibly clean and make sure that it covers the design that you created. If you use stock imagery, it really takes away from the credibility that you did the work versus like creating some sort of imagery that like this is actually derivative of the work that you did. I know that this is going to come up with NDA questions, so I will say that if you have NDA concerns, if it has concerns regarding a brand or name, you can obscure those brands or name by using a different brand or name or blurring it. Sometimes I have like omitted them with a complete solid shape sensor. If it's specifically to the project details, then we might want to expand those information data protection by including password protection. So as you see here, Stephanie G has included a lock to show to the potential viewer that their project might be NDA confined. So in general, though, the rule for NDA is if the product is public facing and accessible, then you're usually good to show it as a portfolio item. But if it's not public facing and still in production, it's still working behind the scene, yeah, protect your NDA, protect yourself by being very cognizant of how you present that information forward. Because at the end of the day, your resume, your portfolio, that 5-second impression is to get your foot through the door so you can talk to a real human being. Lastly, for your homepage, this is just a note for your footer because this is the last impression of that scan. Once again, provide that clear call to action for someone to contact you. Here, I did a little cute note of your special message to other people and including them the opportunity to have their name and email address visible. And at here, I have this like really big brain thought that I have. And that's the notion of if every person wrote a page, that's a 7 billion page book and a lot of binding and a lot of pages. I don't want to know how heavy it would be, but man, that's a lot of stories we can tap into. Okay, well, we've shifted over from the homepage. Now how do we optimize our case study presentations? This case I like to recommend to people. I know the blank is a really big daunting start, but just start writing your draft. It doesn't have to be perfect. Apply the design process, get messy with it. And if you have trouble like starting, one of my favorite approaches is to use the recorder app on your phone. And nowadays with the recorder app, there's transcription abilities built into it, and you can use that to help guide yourself and create that outline of how you want to talk about your case studies. Secondly, here, and probably more importantly than the first, is remember to design for enjoyable reading. Sometimes our case studies, like when we're looking through portfolios and resumes as a hiring manager, it gets really redundant really fast. So providing a little bit of visual variety in how we're condensing information, thinking about our H1s, H2s, accessibility, maybe our hiring manager recruiter, maybe using keyboard speeches, keyboard readers. So ensuring that our images also have alt text, keeping accessibility in mind with color contrasts. Just be reflective. If you're saying that you're a designer and you design with accessibility in mind, your website should definitely be able to pass an accessibility checker and uphold that expectation. And once again, affirms your credibility. At the end of the day, every second that we can have someone's attention, it's another that we can consider as a gift of someone's thoughtful investment into our future selves. So if we think about it that way, we're designing a gift for them to be like, oh man, please be excited about me. I'm really invested into the work, and this is how I present that work forward. This one is another tip that I have, and I tell people often because I see this quite a bit from graduating students. And that's to remember that your case study needs to be a story, not a thesis, not a presentation deliverable for your professor. The context for your portfolio has shifted when it's in the academic sense versus when we are in real world job seeking and searching contexts. When we're in educational spaces, we're often trying to ascertain your understanding of the complete nature of the process. And usually those processes are a little bit more structured to allow you that framework of understanding, but this is how it's supposed to go. But in the real world, supposed to go often is a little bit and a lot of it more messy. So this is why I also try to nudge people to remember that the people that you're designing your portfolio to, I haven't necessarily said designers. That might be your team, that might be your colleagues, but at the end of the day, it's often somebody specializing in recruitment and hiring practices. They are not going to have that in-depth understanding of every single design process or decision you make. So we got to be mindful and include an accessible story for them to enjoy as well. With this in mind, I say don't include every possible detail. Structure your case studies to where if somebody just want to go to your case studies, get a quick overview, they can have access to that. And then you can dive deeper into the extra details later. As you see here, I have pulled out an excerpt from Stephanie G's portfolio, and that her portfolio covers a little bit more explanation around her design decisions and processes. What I'm not showing you is the summary that she had above introducing this problem space. For supporting your design decisions, that part of the story is more curated for your potential direct team that you'll be working alongside with. They're not going to read every single, like, these little bits here. I've looked at her case study several times. I could not tell you what any of this means in recall, but I know that she had to invest the work into this to do an iteration of this experience. But if I want to dive deeper, then she has a clear explanation for how this user flow actually goes. So you just got to be a little bit accessible and flexible with how you're presenting your story for anyone that wants to be super high level and then super granular. All right, moving on to optimizing your case studies. Close out with your outcomes and reflections. Like a great story, we talked about our introduction and the summary. Now we want to close out with some impressions and thoughts from that experience. We want to highlight our business impacting results as far as how do we change this project simply by being involved as the designer. This is really clear to business cases where it distinguishes you as more entry level to somebody that's a little bit more established in the industry because you can call out to the business case relevance. How can we optimize for less support tickets by changing the call to action color to a more accessible color contrast? That's also one that's an example. Another one is that like one of my recent experiences outside design is that I am intaking applications, and there's a really big button that calls out, here's how you make a payment. Except one big problem. That link is almost the same color as the background, and therefore nobody can actually see it once I'm calling it out on directions for instruction. So I have to work with my product team to get that color contrast updated and corrected. So that way we can improve our current click rate from 6% to 60%, simply because we changed one text color. Lastly, for your case studies, I have a note here to include navigation that the viewer can access, give them a little bit more accessibility to that space, and then they have a little bit more ownership around exploring the idea of you. All right, being a little bit mindful of time, so 10 minutes left. I want to cover a little bit base about your About Me page. This is really the page where I think most future teams cover the idea of you. So have fun, be personable, include your hobbies, and have fun telling your story. And this, I have a little bit of a section here for the perks of working with Missy, pretty much because after looking at so many job listings and positions, there's a lot of perks of working with the company. So I kind of want to be tongue in cheek with that of here's the idea of what it's like to work with me. All right. What does establishing credibility look like during the interview? This part is pretty straightforward in the sense of research for doing more of our design process, optimize it, research the company more in detail as far as understanding what their needs are, and then translating that forward in your 5-second impression. For the beginning of this presentation, and then do the potential hiring team a favor and dig up some information about them. Now it's a little like weird morally on whether or not we should be a little bit more investigative into people's backgrounds or whatnot, because I know that I personally, as you could see, a little mindful of that. But some people are really excited when you're like, oh man, you actually took time to read my portfolio and like learn that I'm into jet skiing and bowling. Yeah, so that gets really people excited and really like, wow, this person wants to invest in me as a future colleague. I want to learn more about them. And it helps you stand out because you're investing into your future idea of what it's like to work with you. If you are connected with a company recruiter, lean on them for help because they are your advocates. They've helped plenty of other people get through the interview process. And at the end of the day, their success is your success. Oh, excuse me, your success is their success. It helps them with their metrics and how they've helped convert people as candidates to um, workers. So in their case, they want to do what's best for you and the company. With your preparation, optimize that your interview will be conducted differently and on various timelines. Things such as the profile of the company being large, if it's like any one of the uh, larger corporations, they are often having to consider larger budget constraints, larger time frames. Therefore, their interview process will likely be very, very lengthy. Versus startup companies, such as a small group, you often have that ability to be a little bit more agile and adaptable. And so, like, be considerate for yourself and your sanity that you may not get an immediate reply right away. Below down here, I have like typical interview steps and exercises that are often conducted during our interviews. And these include portfolio presentations, behavioral interviews, whiteboard challenges, take-home challenges, and design critiques, all of which I could easily go into one by one for an hour each. So I will save you all that, but at least give you a high-level introduction of what to expect during the interview. Each one of these serves a different purpose in understanding how you are as a candidate. Portfolio presentations, often a background check of your history and how you can provide your history's relevance to the future projects that they're working on. Behavioral interview tends to be more of a one-on-one setting to understand your needs as a designer versus the team's needs as company's expectations and so forth and so on. Whiteboard challenge and take-home challenge have some similar semblance to one another, but essentially they are real life scenario, well, as close to real life scenarios as you can get. They mock the problem solving spaces that you might be expected to fulfill in the actual job capacity. So whiteboard challenge tends to be more user flow focused, whereas take home challenge tends to be more visual focus. And design critique, that's giving impressions on how to optimize an existing experience for the better. And that includes assessing that experience for the as is state versus your recommendations as a designer. But ultimately, let's optimize your mind for the interview. Believe in yourself, because if you don't believe in yourself, how can anyone else be expected to believe in you? And I know it can be really daunting, really wild, but this is where I lean into the energy of other people that you've worked with and lean on their words. Don't let the bad overshadow all the good that you've done. Because at the end of the day, we're designers. And if we're hoping to expect change from other people by proposing designs, proposing ideas for others to buy into, we need to be able to buy into that belief and confidence for ourselves. And lastly, get some good rest. Rest always helps all the way through. And if you can't get rest because you're nervous, try again the next time. All right, now we got to the delivery part of the interview. How do you optimize for this? And in my case, like I recommend finding somebody to partner up with to get that feedback. If you don't have that ability, then lend to record app technique to record yourself, giving that presentation, and then listen to yourself afterwards and make a corrective revision of that session afterwards. But ultimately, during the interview itself, be friendly. It goes a long way. I've had a lot of things go wrong during an interview, but because I was just like, you know what, that's fine. Let's see if we can do something about it. And here's how. I got told my first interview with IBM, my work had nothing to do with the job role. And so they asked me, is there something that you have that is more resemblance of the work we're asking you to do? And I was like panicking in my brain because I'm like, well, what do I do? Oh, I had this work from ages ago that I can speak to. And it turns out that work was my Neopets work from middle school. That's what got me the job into IBM as a professional. Weird, unexpected, but very human. You can do this, everybody. I don't know where you're coming in from, but I know that each and every one of y'all can do this with invested effort, invested thought, and thinking about this differently outside of like yourself. Be thoughtful as far as how you're presenting this for your future audience and hiring manager, your team, and colleague. Because at the end of the day, they are rooting the best for you. There's just a lot of information we have to dig through together. And yeah, I have a section here for questions, but it seems that I might be at the end of time. So I'll leave it to Joshua to say otherwise.